New policy announced today on the issue of Syria. Daily Beast reports, quote, the U.S. will deploy about 400 troops and hundreds of U.S. support personnel to train the moderate Syrian opposition. Training is expected to begin in early spring at sites in Saudi Arabia, moderate Saudi Arabia, I'm sure, as well, Turkey, Qatar. Obama signed a defense bill that outlined a plan to fight the Islamic State through airstrikes and also training and equipping moderate Syrian rebels fighting the militants. So where do I begin with this one? Oh, I don't know. How about we take a look at the headlines that came out not too long ago? ABC News, September 16th. Quote, top Syrian warns Congress moderate rebels may sell weapons. That doesn't sound too promising. Common Dreams from October 2nd. Quote, analysts sound the alarm of the myth of moderate Syrian rebels. Wow, that's interesting. The International Business Times. FSA, so the Free Syrian Army, the so-called moderate rebels, sign a truce with ISIS. Wah, 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 wah. Now, understand something. When I say there are no more moderate Syrian rebels in Syria, I mean just that. I don't mean that they never existed. Sure, there are some, but they left. A lot of them fled to Turkey, and a lot of them fled to Europe. And they noticed very quickly that the movement to overthrow Assad was taken over by jihadists. And it's not just one group of jihadists either. It's all kinds of jihadists. You have al-Nusra Front, which is one of the leading groups fighting to overthrow Assad. You have ISIS fighting to overthrow Assad. That's where they gain most of their power and their stronghold. That's where ISIS started their reign of terror. You have other jihadist organizations in there. And what you had was, in the past, you had moderate Sunnis who wanted to overthrow Assad because Assad was a Shiite and they viewed him as an oppressor and a dictator and he had done bad things and they wanted to take their country back for themselves. But very quickly, the rebel movement turned from there are some moderate Sunnis and there are some extremist Sunnis too. Now it's almost all extremist Sunnis, which are the groups ISIS, al-Nusra Front, and other jihadist organizations. And also, I think this issue is the perfect example that we can point to where we can prove just how fucked up U.S. foreign policy is and how Washington has no clue what the fuck they're doing. They really don't. Because if you remember, it was about 1.5 years or 2 years ago when Obama came out, he gave a speech at night. All the major networks were covering it, where he was making the case to go to war in Syria. Now, what was noteworthy about that speech? He was making the case to go in to try to topple Assad. Now, that's funny, right? Because it was 1 year or 1.5 years later that they pulled this bait and switch. Because they just flat out reversed sides in the war and acted like, nobody should notice it. They just flipped sides. We were going to go in and fight Assad, and then 1 year later we're like, how about we go in and fight the people that Assad is fighting? So you're de facto aligned with Assad because Assad is fighting ISIS and Assad is fighting extremists. And then they try to do this crazy fucking thing where they split it, right? Where they say, we're not with Assad and we're not with ISIS. We're just with the FSA. So we are with the only moderates in the region. Again, the only problem with that is those people are more aligned with ISIS than they are with Assad. So you might think you're funding this independent third group in there that's going to swoop in and save the day and make Syria a Jeffersonian democracy, but in reality, you're supporting people who just signed a truce with ISIS, and said, hey, let's not fight each other so that we can both focus on trying to topple Assad. And look, we don't know what will happen in the region. The region is already totally fucked and absolutely destroyed. But what's going to happen if you topple Assad? Who fills that power vacuum? We don't know. It's very likely that it could be somebody from ISIS or somebody from al-Nusra Front because they are the most active organizations, the most active groups, and the most dedicated people in the war that are there. So you're really fucking playing with fire. And now we're doing this crazy policy where it's like, okay, well, fine, we won't go in and fight like a literal war there, but we're going to send in like 400 dudes to try to train people and stuff. And we're going to like give them guns. Because what? Every time we've given guns to people in the past, it's never come back to bite us in the ass. Except it has virtually every single time. Ronald Reagan gave weapons to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. You know who the Mujahideen later became? The Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Ronald Reagan created Osama bin Laden. Ronald Reagan created these extremist groups. We gave them financial backing, we gave them weapons, and we did it because at the time in Afghanistan, they were fighting the Soviet Union, and we hated the Soviet Union and communism that much. They keep buying into this narrative that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But the problem is, sometimes that person becomes your true enemy. Not too far down the road either.